and that is assumptions. Can't make decisions without them, but you can't trust them at the moment. So what happens when you can't trust the foundation of everything that you thought you knew gets turned up on its ear? So I'm going to ask one of the class members, and I want to pardon, I don't remember your names, but how about there's a gentleman in the front row that looks like you're wearing a blue mask, wearing a blue sweater or sweatshirt. Yeah, you just turned your head. I don't know your first name. But if I could ask you, what's Natalie, or Professor Welch, do you want to help me out here?
Yeah, it's Makai.
Makai, I want to ask you a question. When you woke up this morning, what were some of the assumptions that you made as you were waking up, getting ready to go out, come to class for the day?
Just anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
I assumed it'd be sunny out.
Cup of coffee, maybe? You assume you're going to have a cup of coffee?
Didn't have time for that.
Okay. How about traffic? Did you assume the traffic might be bad? Might be easy?
Yeah.
How about, you were going to put on, some clean clothes this morning. Was that something that you assumed before you got out the door? So my point being, though, Makai and everyone, is that what happens if you wake up and all of a sudden, everything you think you know, every assumption that you've made gets turned upside down? You've got no clean clothes to put on. If you're a coffee drinker, for some reason, all the coffee shops are closed. If you think it's going to be, you looked at the weather report that night and it said, hey, it's going to be sunny and nice and 70 degrees, and you woke up and it's cloudy and 34 degrees and raining. What do you do when all of your assumptions that you've made in the past are now wrong and you can't trust them? What do you do? Well, now you start to create new assumptions and new thoughts and start to analyze and look at new data. And that's really what we want to talk about, is how the assumptions that we've all made about sports, attendance at live events, all of the things that go into being a sports fan are now no longer valid. And believe me, this hurts somebody like me because I've been studying this for years, but it's just not the same anymore. And Mark's going to chime in, when Mark and I do this presentation and we've talked to others. And so Mark, and I'll, and all that. And by the way, I'm going to be picking on somebody real soon. So get ready.
Yeah. And you just missed, Luke was sitting here with his Starbucks cup. I saw him kind of when he's thinking about Starbucks being closed. I think he was a little bit.
All right.
Crestfallen for many people.
Starbucks guys coming up next. So get ready, but I won't divulge the questions. But, we started off, and it's always good to start off by what do we know? And we just conducted this fan study of about 3,700 sports fans, about 19 different sports, both professional, college, and even minor league. But really, as Mark indicated, what do you do when the biggest part of being a sports fan is taken away from you? Well, the biggest part, of course, is being able to go to games. So what happened? We looked year over year to see how are the major sports doing. Major League Baseball down almost 14 in terms of fandom. NBA down 4. I'm going to do a little rounding here. So pardon if it says, minus 3.8, I'm going to round to 4. College basketball also down. In fact, down 16.7, down a lot. NFL managed to kind of keep things kind of on an even keel, up 2.3. College football down almost 9. NHL down 5.5, 5.6. Major League Soccer kept it pretty flat. Now, Major League Soccer has the smallest base of any of the sports that we looked at. So you have to be real careful when you're looking at things that, if the base is smaller, the numbers can be a little bit more volatile. But here's another point I want to make. Let's look at the median age of fans. Because what do we know? we see that fans are getting younger. Major League Baseball, the average age down a year. NBA down 3 years. College basketball down 6. NFL down 3. College football 4, and so forth and so on. So what's happening? What's happening is we are building some new assumptions. So by understanding what these different, assumptions will allow you to be able to make better decisions. So let's start with willingness of fans to attend live sporting events. Now, we're going to get into a little later about what it's going to take, but what do we see? We see that the younger generations, the Gen Z, 13 to 23-year-olds, millennials, 24 to 39-year-olds, and even the Gen Xers, the 40 to 55-year-olds, they still, remain pretty strong, when it comes to attending live sports event. We broke it down by generation. But this is based on what we call the willingness to return. But what happens with the groups that aren't willing to return? One of the sports marketing majors raise their hand for me?
Marketing major.
Somebody?
Marketing.
Bueller? Sports
John.
marketing?
John.
The young lady yeah. So let me talk to you for a minute. You're talking about sports marketing. That's a pretty wide variety of places you can go. In an ideal world, what would be the dream job you would love to have? What's your first name, by the way?
Haley.
Haley, what would be the dream job for Haley when she gets out of school?
Bailey, but
Bailey, my bad.
You're good. It's hard with the masks. Yeah, what's the dream job?
Working at Nike.
Did you hear that?
No, actually, I didn't. Can somebody?
You're working
at Nike.
Nike.
Oh, got it. So you want to go to work for Nike, obviously the number one footwear and athletic brand worldwide, company with 45% market share and really at the top of the food chain when it comes to sports marketing. Good choice, by the way. But what happens though if you're in a situation where you're not going to go to work at Nike? In fact, one of the areas that people are talking about more and more is the area of sports sponsorship. So area of sports sponsorship, of course, is that brands sponsor teams and leagues and colleges and universities. So if you're on the selling end of a sports sponsorship and everything you thought you knew about what you were doing has been turned upside down, but then you are on the buying end of a sports sponsorship, everything you knew has been turned on its heels. What do you do? You've got to clearly rethink, retrench. If you're selling a sports sponsorship, let's say you're Linfield University, and I know you're a smaller school, but let's say you're a Division I football program or Division I basketball program. But we know based on the last chart that college basketball fandom, number one, are down 16.7%. But we also know that there is a lower willingness of fans by generation to attend those games. So if you're Linfield University and Division I and you're trying to sell a sponsorship to Nike, what do? You give up? No, you can't give up, because you've got to be able to understand what it is are those things that will drive people back, and then be able to look at both the positives and negatives. Bailey, if Linfield University or if Nike approached Linfield, let's say, about a sports sponsorship, what might be some of the things that Linfield might mention as a positive when dealing with them, just out of curiosity? What might you say?
It builds a tight-knit community and everybody comes to games.
It's a little hard to hear.
She said a tight-knit community and all the community comes to the games.
Those are all important things. But in our study, we found a couple of things. We asked people what it would get them to attend live events again. And we asked them by sport. And then what we did was we actually grouped things by what I would like to call positive indicators and negative indicators. So in this case, we looked at three things. One, vaccinations. Of course, a lot of us are getting vaccinated. I've gotten vaccinated. Mark has gotten vaccinated. Hopefully a number of you all will get your vaccines, although I'm not promoting it one way or the other. But a mask mandate and space between attendees. But what we're seeing is that outdoor sports will probably see the most interest in getting people back into what I would call some sense of normal. So whatever you can do to be able to promote those outdoor sports, maybe it's not the time right now to be promoting college basketball. I'm not saying you give up. Maybe you just wait a little bit until we get further. Again, Mark.
Let me jump in here. I mean, one of the things is sort of an avid sports fan and also a professional observer of sports. To me, it's been fascinating to watch how sports and sponsors have pivoted over the last year, because you can't have fans in attendance. You know, you turn on an NCAA football game or a basketball game, and you see the seats are all sort of covered up with tarp. Well, smart sponsors, you know, have their name and logo all over the tarp. You know, typically a part of the fan experience, at least when you go to a professional sporting event here in the New York area, you know, the sponsors are all over the stadium. You know, hey, come by our booth and sign up for you know, a new cell phone service, and we'll give you a free sweatshirt. We'll give you this. We'll give you that. So many of those activations, you can't do them anymore. So I think people have had to pivot, go to more creative executions. And that really ties in with what Neil's talking about, which is like the assumptions, the standard assumptions, and the typical way of doing things have been completely upended over the last year.
What's also interesting is that if you look and see, I talked about outdoor, but what do we know? Major League Baseball, MLB, NFL, Major League Soccer, and college football all have the lowest response rate when it comes to what I would call the vaccination requirement. But look at how they have among the highest response rates when it comes to mask mandate or space between attendees. So while fans are willing to give, let's say, a little bit of a break on, let's say, vaccines, because clearly it's going to take a little bit of time, what they're not willing to sacrifice necessarily are the other things that will go into keeping them safe. What's interesting is that Major League Soccer fans recorded the actual lowest, what we're calling uncomfortable about attending a live game. Does anybody want to take a shot at why that might be? Why Major League Soccer fans have the lowest uncomfortable feeling about attending a live game? Anybody want to take a shot out there? One of my sports management majors out there? Come on, take a shot at it.
Why?
One of the marketing majors?
Anyone? Why would soccer possibly be? Yeah, John.
This is the environment. They're always shouting, yelling,
Screaming, singing. Well, actually, John, that's not the reason. The reason is because the MLS soccer tends to draw a younger demographic. And of course, which group is less susceptible to being, to coming down with COVID and then having, let's say longer term issues in terms of their health. So people feel safer, younger people feel a little bit more confident in that, hey, if I get it, I won't end up in the hospital. I won't die. Look, there are outliers out there. Make no mistake about it. But again, younger audience. So again, gives you a chance to understand what's driving a particular situation. And that's really, again, also about assumptions. Don't just make an assumption based on the things that you thought you knew. But again, as we got into this, which fans are most likely to return to stadiums? Gen Z and millennials, the youngest of the group, had what we call the lowest action requirement for attending live games. So for instance, Major League Baseball, which has typically struggled attracting younger fans, this might be a chance for them to go after some younger fans, bring them into the Major League Baseball fold. But we also know that that group of folks are different. Hey, how many of the people in the room right now play sports-oriented video games? Professor Welch, what do we got? About half, most, all?
I would say like 75%.
Got it.
Yeah.
How many of the folks in the room, I could have done this, by the way, with using poll everywhere or something, but I like doing it this way too.
Yeah.
How many have participated in some type of fantasy sports games, online or however? Okay, last question. How many have gambled on sports? One right now, I promise not to.
They can't say that. They're all athletes, so they can't.
Okay, I got it. So I wouldn't want to.
No one has. No one.
Okay. Okay, I get it. So we'll, but here's my point. What Major League Baseball knows, or what Major League Baseball would know if they were looking at our data, is that if they want to attract a younger population, what are those things that in fact will attract a younger population? And we know it's things like fantasy, esports, and there's a number of other things, by the way. But my point is that, again, by breaking down some of those assumptions that they thought they knew, they have an opportunity to be able to bring in new groups of fans. An ideal way would be, how about, everybody uses this term, the gamification of sports. How about if Major League Baseball had an app where you could go play, literally play fantasy sports or fantasy baseball with other people right in the stands while the game is going on, or some way to, let's say, be more attractive to fans or younger fans. So again, understanding what drives the different fan groups and then how to get them back into the stands.
Yeah, Neil, let me jump in here. I think this is always an interesting, and again, just sort of watching sports on TV, attending sports in person. To me, it's always interesting to look and see which different sponsors spend money against different teams in different sports. You look at golf, which tends to attract an older, whiter male demographic. Not all the ads, but many of the ads are like for investments, insurance, that sort of stuff. Whereas you look at a sport like MLS, which attracts sort of a younger, hipper fan base, well, then you're getting energy drinks and things like that. So, again, using Neil's scenario of you're either a seller of sponsor or a buyer of sponsors, I think the next couple of years is going to be a super interesting landscape in terms of fan engagement, whether it's digital streaming or, back to in-person, which will return. It's just a matter of when and how.
I'm going to assume that most of you in the room right now are in that Gen Z kind of generation, although probably Professor Welch, you might be a millennial. I'm not asking your age or anything, but I'm going to go with millennial.
Yeah, I'm a millennial.
By a show of hands, how many of you would attend a live sporting event right now in a stadium or an arena? What's the percentage we got there? And I see Reese also, by the way.
90%.
Okay, so 90% of you would attend an event and there's my point. Younger audiences feel as though they would be more comfortable attending a live event. So if you want to attract a younger audience, do the things, provide the things, offer the things that younger audiences would be more apt to want to take part in. Now, this also brings up another interesting point. I'm going to kind of take a step back for a minute. Bailey, sorry to pick on you for a second, Bailey, but Bailey talked about wanting to go to work for Nike. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Nike is an amazing company. I mean, anybody that owns 45% market share in the athletic sport footwear business, has my total respect. But you know what? There's an awful lot of other jobs out there. So when you're considering, what you want to do, sports sponsorship right now is a huge area. Player analytics, huge area. Other team oriented data, as far as attracting fans, season ticket holders, huge. So there's a number of places where if sports is where you want to end up, where you can go and not just, let's say, go to work for Nike. I asked this question a couple of weeks ago in another class, and of course, they wanted to go to work and data analysis for the New York Yankees. Well, there aren't that many jobs like that available, quite frankly. So let's talk about some of the most important actions for boosting attendance. So one of the things is that we talked about esports, we talked about fantasy sports, we talked about all the other things that young people are more apt to do. But one of the things that we also know that young people want is that they want to see everyone out there wearing a mask, or it's among one of the most important factors in getting those people, that group of fans, back into stadiums. They do appear wary, though, of other fans that are not following protocols. So we know from previous slides, how many of them won't return to a stadium. So again, attracting younger fans, it's not just about the fans, it's about the periphery, or about, how to make the environment safe, for those younger fans. And we know that fans who played fantasy sports are more likely to return to live games, but they have different priorities. While NFL and NBA fans want everyone to wear a mask, MLS and NHL fans mainly want to see the employees and others. College fans value price promotion. So it's interesting. Fans of college sports want to see the prices come down of tickets. So there's going to be so if you're in that selling sponsorships, selling tickets, selling, different types of ways to bring people back into the stadium, it's time to put the old assumptions aside. If you're right now, if Professor Welch gives you an assignment and asks you that she wants you to evaluate where might be the best place to put the next NHL franchise, it might be time to put the old assumptions behind. So start, opening up your mind, thinking about what the new assumptions will be. I will tell you, as someone that's been in research for 20 years, every piece of research I've ever been involved in, whether I've made it, whether I've bought it, whether I have stolen it, whether I have used it, always have assumptions built in. Well, guess what? I've now got to start paying more to what these assumptions entail. And it's a big part of what we have going on right now. So, as you're, responding to class projects, as you're responding, when you start doing job interviews, remember one thing: don't make the same assumptions. My dad used to always like to tell me, I think he stole this from somebody else, but he always used to say, if you do what you've always done, you get what you've always got. Well, if you do what you've always done with wrong assumptions, you're not even going to get what you've always got. You're going to get less than you've already got.
Yeah, and pertinent to this streaming habits thing, Neil and I were talking about it earlier. We saw something from The Economist today that basically talked about in 2012, which is 9 years ago, I think 90% of the US population got their sports through some sort of bundled service. Today, it's down to 65%. And I think that number is accelerating. So, that's doing all sorts of crazy things. I mean, look, where you have Amazon bidding $11 billion to get the Thursday night NFL game. That's an extraordinary number. And also, as a marketer, I mean, look, the safest media buy you could make if you're buying car ads or beer ads or any of that stuff, NFL was the safest media buy you could make. Guess what? That's no longer the case, because their audience, you could argue their audience is down by a third. And it's probably a lot of the younger people like yourselves, who are, consuming it via streaming media.
You know, what the pandemic has done is it has essentially accelerated every trend or every change in, market situation. I mean, here's a perfect example, and I'll just use one. But in 2018, we saw approximately, 13% of Major League Baseball fans streamed in Major League Baseball on their TV. In 2019, it went up slightly to 14%. But in 2020, amid the pandemic, it went to 24%. Now, if you're somebody that is selling ads or you're working with streaming media company, let's say you're working in Major League Baseball, you're working with Hulu, you're working with the local Fox Sports Network, you need to really understand how people are engaging, because that audience, as people start to attend live games, as things start to loosen up, you know what? It was going from 13 to 14 and all of a sudden jumped to 24 because frankly, we were all locked down. That may back off now to 16%, 17%. Still up, still increasing, but not the same levels. So it's very important to understand what, trends we were on before the pandemic, what happened as a result of the pandemic, and then where you think things are going to level out. Because things will change. I mean, a perfect example is with golf this weekend. Mark and I are both golf fans, and I play golf. Mark and I both play. We watch golf, and they're reporting that the television numbers from this week's Masters or last week's Masters were down about 30%. That's a big number. 30% from November. Did I get that right, Mark?
I think they were down from history, but actually up from November. Yeah, you
Okay.
and I were talking, those numbers were confusing, but they
They
gave
were.
very, very valid reasons why they're down. And the Masters is a blue chip franchise, for Pete's sakes. I mean, my God, if you can't buy an ad on the Masters and feel good about it, what's this world coming to?
So a few minutes ago, we talked a little bit about fantasy sports. How many of you, again, have participated in fantasy sports participation? I see somebody raising two hands. What's your most popular sport that you've participated in? Just shout it out in a couple of cases. You don't have to raise your hands.
Football.
Is it all football? How about basketball?
College basketball.
Okay. How many of you, by the way, I guess we're not allowed to talk about gambling, so I won't. So college basketball. How about NBA? Anybody do any NBA fantasy sports? Interesting. Have any of you played some of the daily fantasy games online, or was that considered a no-no again? They're probably not allowed to do that. All right. What can I tell you? Sure. So, but again, look at the trend line for people playing fantasy sports during the pandemic. Across the board, we see an accelerated increase, from where they were. In fact, Major League Baseball actually went down from 18 to 19 and then zoom up to 12 in 2020. NBA, again, down from 18 to 20, again, took off 18 and 19 took off in 2020. So where we saw a number of leagues, declining in terms of fantasy sports, the pandemic changed the market, changed your assumptions, changed everything. So how you react to that is going to be important. Do I think that NBA fantasy will stay at 19%? No, there's no possible way. It was declining from 2018 to 19. It took a zig zoom up in 2020. It's probably going to level off somewhere. But do I think it will be better off? The answer is yes. Do I think the next time go ahead, Mark?
Yeah, I was going to say, and this is just more indication of, I think people couldn't go to the games, so they wanted to engage with their favorite teams and favorite sports, and fantasy was one way to do it, and certainly gambling was one way to do it too.
Yeah, speaking of gambling, I know we're not, let's just kind of assume that we're all not, nobody's gambling here on sports. But, we did see a big increase in the number of people betting on sports pretty much across the board. People were locked down. The NFL and the NBA are the numbers 1 and 2 favorite sports for people that gamble on sports. Also, we found that those, of course, the people that play fantasy sports show the biggest interest in sports gambling. But what a lot of you, though, as you're looking at jobs, as you're looking to get out when you get out of school, don't be surprised if there are a lot of jobs in the sports gambling market, because right now, as Mark indicated, this is turning into the Wild West. I see Professor Welch has her hand up.
Yeah, Neil, I was wondering, how much do you think this has to do with like the legislation too in the different states?
Mark, do you want to address that?
Yeah, great question. And I think, again, this is, Neil and I could do a whole class just on gambling. Like I said,
And we did.
We could probably do a whole semester on it. But I think gambling is now legally approved in 25 states. It's up and operational in about 16 or 17 states. And Neil and I are convinced within 2 years it'll be legal in all 50 states. Interesting thing, little local color for everyone. I live in New Jersey. Of course, people would tell you everything's legal in Jersey, but certainly we have gambling legal here. And pre-pandemic, you had a bunch of people in New York City, everybody on their lunch hour would jump on the PATH train, come over to New Jersey, and their cell phones would, geolocate that they were in New Jersey. They'd all place their bets. Then they'd jump back on the PATH train and go back into the city. So, that's just the sort of the regional equivalent of driving over the state line. But I think within the next 2 years, you won't have to drive over any state lines. I think it will be legal everywhere. And these numbers you're seeing that show growth, Professor Welch, will skyrocket even further.
The state of New York is one of the states that has approved legalized gambling in 2021. And Governor Cuomo has, said that, he is going to do everything possible for the cities in particular to accelerate that process, because look, let's face it, cities are hurting for tax revenue right now. They need new sources of revenue. But you know who else is hurting for revenue right now? Colleges and universities, professional sports teams, amateur sports, you name it. So they're looking at revenue generated by sports gambling, whether it's in the form of a tax or some type of surcharge or something, as a way to be able to offset some of the losses of tax revenue. They are looking at sports gambling as an opportunity to be able to recover some of that. So, as Mark said, we expect all 50 states to legalize sports betting at the state level and start to tax it and generate revenue, Mark.
Yeah. Also, one thing that's important, there's the expression "follow the money." I think a very important thing to watch over the next couple of years is, all right, so what are states doing with the money they're getting from gambling? The last Winter Olympics, the sort of surprise Olympic team was Norway, right? Norway was up competing with the US and Russia for most medals. And why is that? Because Norway legalized gambling a number of years ago. And I think something like 6 or 7% of every dollar that's bet on gambling goes into an Olympic development fund. And they took all that gambling money and pumped it into their Olympic development fund. And within a short period of time, wow, they turned out a super high quality Olympic team. The state of Colorado also has a provision where a percentage of every dollar bet on sports gambling goes into a fund to build outdoor recreational facilities like trails, skate parks, hiking, all that stuff. So for a lot of you students who are interested in eventually pursuing careers in sports, there's going to be a lot of jobs available in facilities, building, all that stuff. So you may not want to work for a sports gambling company, but you still could absolutely benefit from the sports gambling boom by getting a job in sports in one of these other areas that's funded by gambling.
Look, a lot of states have legalized marijuana for recreational use, and they are benefiting from the taxes and the different fees that they are collecting as a result of this. Now, you may be entirely against it. You may be for it. I'm not placing a value judgment or a value statement on it one way or the other. But the fact is, it has been a source of incremental revenue. And in this case, much of the incremental revenue that will be generated as a result of sports gambling will go back into the community in the form of, as Mark said, fields and skate parks and, youth programs and you name it. So again, there is some, good. It's not just about the gamblers making money or the, even the folks that do the state gambling. Just out of curiosity, Mark and I were actually talking about this morning. We are actually interviewing for an intern position. Forget that you're athletes for a minute. How many of you, just out of curiosity, think that gambling on sports is a good idea for states to get into or control it? Just out of curiosity. Is anybody willing to? I see Reese over there is. And then how many of you think it's a bad idea? Anybody think it's a bad idea? See, I think it's a bad idea, if you want to know the truth. I love the idea about gambling on sports, but I'm worried. I'm worried about the integrity. And, where is that? How do you keep it in the guardrails? And that's what worries me. But I do, of course, see the financial benefit that will be generated as a result of this. Now,
Professor Welch, before we, how we doing on time?
Yes.
So 1:30 your time.
All right. Well, I'm gonna kind of wrap it up shortly. But again, we look at the number of gamblers. We look at what's interesting is that one of the things about sports gambling is that it will also create some strange bedfellows. And what do I mean by that? Well, the interesting thing is one of the groups of people that we see who tend to be more inclined to bet on sports other than the one that they are a fan of are golf fans. In some cases they're golfers already and they bet when they play golf. There's a lot of gambling that goes on the golf course. I don't want to say I do that, but it does go on. But again, what we can see is where are these targets coming from? Don't just go to the, gambling on football, I'm going to go talk to football fans. No, that's not the way to really grow. The way to grow is to understand where the opportunities are, where can we find these fans? Don't always assume to go to the easiest place. Yes, they always tell you to go fishing where the fish are, but also go fishing in other ponds. Don't be afraid to try a new spot every once in a while. Look for new target markets, new opportunities. This gets into, again, by generation. As you can see, the interesting thing is the younger generation, your generation, remember you sitting there, you are the least inclined generation to gamble on sports. Now, that could be for a variety of reasons. One could be education. Two could be availability of funds. There's a number of different aspects and things that, we can talk about. But again, understand where the opportunities lie and then what you have to do in order to be able to target or to gain acceptance within that particular market. I just highlighted a couple of other groups here. Also, one of the things we look at is social media fan engagement. Huge opportunity. We're seeing that Twitter and Instagram have seen the biggest jump in usage in 2020 during the pandemic. Again, I will be very curious to see how long they're able to maintain that advantage. Facebook, while it was up during 2020, my guess is that they are going to continue to trend back downward as they had been from 2018 and 2019. But Instagram has been on a steady climb up. Twitter has also been, has been kind of up and down, but for the most part up. But we do see, for instance, that TikTok has definitely stolen some social media market share. Snapchat, also another one, has taken some social media market share. The one that we haven't seen has been YouTube. It seems like the shorter formats, more directed, whether it's on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and even Snapchat, seem to be the ones that are able to grab some of the kind of the share of mind or share of usage. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to ask you, how many of you use Twitter the most as your favorite social media platform? By the way, I have to say that Dr. Welch, your followers have been awesome at responding to posts. So how about Instagram? Are you all on Instagram? How many of you use TikTok, just out of curiosity? Any TikTokers out there? No, not me either. I don't have any reason to. How about Snapchat? Doing a bunch of Snapchats?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's one I haven't gotten into at all. But I do know that a number of the Gen Zs and younger millennials are using Snapchat. But again, it's really all about kind of the shift in social media and the way people are using it and fans. But again, looking at different opportunities there. Esports. How many of you guys are into esports? Just out of curiosity, watching, whether it's any of the esports like on WTBS or TNT, like the Fortnite or Halo and Overwatch games, or even some of the sports games. How many of you are kind of would say you're fans of esports?
You can't say it. There's a few hands in the front.
Is there? We are seeing, the interesting thing is we've actually seen a little bit of a drop actually in esports participation or in esports usage in relationship to traditional sports. So while look, the numbers of people that are paying attention to esports continue to go up, especially during the pandemic, I will be very curious to see what happens long term. Will those gains be realized, and will they take away from traditional sports viewing? How many of you, just out of curiosity, are watching less sports on TV right now? Anybody want to raise less? Well, I don't see anybody in the front. So Professor Welch, how many did we see? How many hands up there?
Just one in the back.
Okay. How many of you are watching more sports on TV?
Yeah.
And Reese over there on the virtual side. So, it's been very interesting right now to, see what's going on. Again, all of the assumptions, everything I thought I knew and everything I thought we knew just doesn't apply anymore. And using the old ideas and old ways of looking at social media. Just to let you know, the survey was completed in December of 2020. We surveyed about 3,500 people, consumers 13 years and older. We used a company that does this for us. So, we looked at pretty much every sport, that's active out there. I don't know. Right now, Linfield does not have access to SBRnet, but we are working with Professor Welch to try to make that happen. And when that does, I'm hoping that we get invited back and we can do some projects together and work on some of these, things together. So,
Yeah,
go ahead,
let me
Mark.
jump in. So yeah, Linfield doesn't have this, but I'm confident we're going to make that happen with Professor Welch. I think, Neil, this data that you shared with everyone today, we're going to send it out so all the students will have access to this data. And I also have to give some special thanks to some people, in addition to Neil, who pulled this all together. We do have an internship program for students who are interested in the analytics part of the business. And we have two students from Syracuse, Alex Borelli and Quinn Spangler, who played a role in putting this together, and also a student from Washington University in St. Louis, Jacob Scheinman. So they all get props for helping out on this today.
So Professor Welch, once you guys become a subscriber, we're going to look to see if we can pull in an intern from one of your classes. I hope that works out. I mean, I hope that is something you'd like to participate in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, can you talk a little bit more about how Syracuse has used the data and how they work with it?
Yeah, well, Neil and I are both Syracuse grads, so I guess we're a little biased towards working with them, and they're a little biased towards working with us. But they have the Falk School of Sports Management. They have a major sports analytics program, and man, the students there, Neil, they just they live, breathe, and sleep this data. And Neil, do you want to highlight the couple of slides that the Syracuse students worked on?
I do. I'm working my way backwards right now, but I will say that between the students from Syracuse University and Watched You, they were really wow, I went too fast. They were really super instrumental in helping us, pull the data together, and then put it into a format for presentation, because that's really what they're going to be doing, once they're getting jobs in sports. So they are using the SBRnet data, they're using other data sources out there, and they are working with the data to really understand, what are the changes, what are the things that are going on. Professor Welch, you may know some of the professors, or may work with some in some of the organizations. NASM, I know and there's the Sports Marketing Association. We're very lined in with them, but we've also offered a couple of specific programs or specific projects to Syracuse to help us with, because we want to take our service into the next generation, and who better than to do it within the next generation of leaders and
I think with the Syracuse students, to get very specific, I think Neil basically dumped a bunch of raw data on them, gave them a prompt and told them to figure it out. And I thought they did a very good job sort of making sense of this data, which is a pretty important question. What's it going to take to get fans back into the building, so to speak?
Yeah. Any questions? John, yeah.
I'm curious, did you guys take any stats about what's the fastest growing sport, and what is that sport that is dying at a fast rate?
Well, John, that was one of the reasons why we did our study when we did, and we didn't decide to halt it because of the pandemic. We wanted to understand, what effect would the pandemic have on sports, and then what opportunities would create. Major League Baseball is an interesting situation. Here's a sport that had been losing fans over the last few years. Now, will the fact that it's outdoors, will the fact that, they've got the ability to be able to do some of the things that younger fans want to see before they're willing to come back to a game, will they be able to implement and then get that message out there? So that's going to be a challenge. The NBA actually have been also growing fans, but remember, they're an indoor sport, an indoor activity. And fans right now show that they're not as fast to return to indoor arenas. So, John, unfortunately, the answer is yes. We do measure sports that are growing and sports that are losing market share or losing interest. But right now, it's all about the changing assumptions or the changing environment that was created by the pandemic.
And just personal opinions about a sport growing or a sport dying? I'm curious.
Well, go ahead, Mark.
I'll take a whack at that. So, one of the things, one of the other chunks of data we have on the site is participation data. So we can tell you last year how many people ran, how many people played pickleball, how many people played soccer, all that stuff. And as you would expect, sports that allow a fair amount of social distancing, like golf had a huge spike in participation last year. Like Neil says, is it sustainable? Skateboarding had a big spike. So any, outdoor sports, everything from, camping to fishing, all that stuff really spiked. And the sports that suffered were, sports that centered around schools, team sports, cheerleading, that sort of stuff, that all went down. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. And I think certain sports like golf, racquetball, they have a real opportunity. They had a great year last year. Can they sustain that growth going forward?
Let me add one thing also. The sports business, in many ways, is an event-driven animal. Football fans are driven out of the Super Bowl, their big event, the playoffs. NHL, has obviously the NHL finals. They have the NHL. Mark, what do they call the games when they play out in the stadiums?
The outdoor games.
Okay, the outdoor and all that. College football, of course, has, March Madness, the Final Four, and all of that. This year, events have played an interesting role in sports. The NFL was able to do pretty much their entire season and their playoffs and their big event, the Super Bowl. And okay, did they do it without fans? You bet. But they remained intact. A number of sports rely on big events like the Olympics. I mean, every year of the last 3 Olympics, I have seen sports that were profiled or featured in the Olympics, especially where there were a number of American gold medalists. Swimming, the year that Michael Phelps won all those medals, all of a sudden swimming got a big shot in the arm. When the men's hockey team, did really well, we saw hockey get a shot in the arm in terms of participation and interest. When volleyball, the women's beach volleyball team, with Misty May Trainer and Carrie Walsh, when they were playing and winning, we saw that get a shot in the arm. What happens when there's no Olympics? Guess what? Those sports start to suffer. So we're a very event-driven world. And without those events, it has changed the landscape and really changed opportunities. So those sports that were able to kind of keep it together were able to keep it together.
Yeah, just a little color to what Neil said. You saw the college hoop numbers were way down. Well, one of the reasons college hoops suffered in 2020, they had to cancel the tournament. There was no March Madness. So that really killed the viewership numbers. And I think people were just less engaged with college hoops because of that.
The number of people that actually played in college, Final Four March Madness pools was down by like 30% this year, according to like ESPN and a couple of the other sites where they monitor that sort of thing. So, and after, every year it seemed like it grew. And then all of a sudden, bam, no March Madness, no tournament.
It takes time when a sport or an activity suffers an interruption. It takes time to build back, if in fact it will build back. You look at a couple of the sports that have lost games or seasons because of labor issues. The National Hockey League, Major League Baseball. It took them a while to build back. So, like Neil said, we have a certain set of assumptions and beliefs and data sets. It's going to be real interesting to see how a lot of this stuff plays out. If we have time for a couple more questions, you could ask about this or ask about anything else that where Neil and I can pull on our experience. We're happy to answer questions about anything.
Is there an event you're most excited to go back to as a fan?
I have tickets. We're huge baseball fans in my house, and I have tickets to go to a Met game in 10 days or 11 days. And as you could tell by the fact that I'm counting the days, I'm very excited about that. To me, part of the fan experience, and Neil and I were talking about this the other day, you're at the game, you're with other fans, you're interacting with them. I think that's sort of part of what I've missed about in-person attendance. And like Neil said, I think people have been sort of replicating that process through social media. I mean, you guys probably do the same thing. When I'm watching the NCAA, when I'm watching the golf, I'm texting with my buddies. We're talking about what's going on. So eager to get that experience back in the buildings where it's such a great experience.
Look, I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up going to live sporting events. And over the years, I've I have a certain affinity towards football, whether it's college or professional. And, for me, there was nothing like going to a college game in a packed stadium. My daughter went to the University of Florida in Gainesville. On any given Saturday, there were 96,000, people packed into the swamp. And I can tell you, I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of major, I've been to LSU, I've been to Death Valley, I've been to, Notre Dame, I've been to the Big House in Michigan, I've been to the Horseshoe at Ohio State. So I've been to a lot of these really big college football stadiums, but nothing to me was like going to the swamp on an SEC Saturday game. And I can say the same thing with a big NFL game. I mean, to me, I would like to get that feeling back, and hopefully, a lot of people will like to get that feeling back.
Yeah, Neil, you had me until you talked about the Florida thing. Gosh, you know how to get in my heart. I was at Tennessee basically the same time Tim Tebow destroyed us, like every year. So
Well, my daughter was actually there during the 4 Tebow years, and she was lucky enough to have a really overindulgent father that just so happened to be in the sports business that could get her tickets to during that time there were 4 national championships, 2 basketball, 2 football. She went to all the national championship games, and as she said, when she graduated, she said, I could not have had any better college experience. Lucky enough she managed to get her master's degree in 5 and get a job, but just like, Professor Welch said, there's nothing like SEC Saturday.
that is true. That's true. Well, thank you guys. Everybody, can we give them a little round of applause?
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us.
Professor Welch, thank you very much for having us and for allowing us to profile you. For those of you that have not read the profile that we did on SBRnet about your, Professor Welch, I would highly recommend reading it. I found it incredibly compelling. Your teacher has an incredible backstory, and I think if you haven't read it, I'd like, read it.
Yeah, you're also fortunate to have a teacher who has really worked in the field very
Yes.
recently. I know I went to journalism school, and there was such a difference between teachers who'd actually worked in the field versus those who were strictly academic. So look, you're very fortunate, and hopefully you carry all that, those lessons and that inspiration forward.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it.
Bye, Professor Welch. Bye, everybody. Bye, class.
Bye, everybody. All right. Thanks, Reese. All right, guys.